Alternate presidents, because why not? Scenario 1. What if Benjamin Harrison, son of William Henry, got a second term? It's a bit of a stretch because he became super unpopular due to his love of tariffing, plus the return of a previous president and the rise of the Populist Party, which was actually kind of aligned with the Republicans. Hilariously enough, North Dakota voted for all of them, but it's not super far out there. Maybe Harrison and James Weaver do a little better campaigning and they can flip a few, splitting the vote in some places, thanks Electoral College. So Grover Cleveland won't get famous for serving 2 non-consecutive terms, and Vice President Levi Morton would get kicked from power, being replaced by Minister to France Reed. That's not Whitley, that's Whitelaw. Whitelaw? You can tell the Republicans were completely different at this time because Harrison wanted to expand education and actually end voter suppression. He would likely try to pass the Lodge Act of 1890 again. In real life, it only passed the House by 7 votes and completely failed in the Senate due to the filibuster, so it's likely to not go farther than that. He was for the annexation of Hawaii, but didn't want America to go further into imperialism. But also he has to deal with the Panic of 1893. Harrison did support workers' rights, but he absolutely caused the panic because of his heavy support of tariffs. Turns out being a nationalistic douche and trying to tax foreign goods is actually a really bad thing. It's not encouraging people to get local stuff that doesn't exist, it's just making things more expensive. And so if Harrison committed to the tariffs, this would only make the panic even worse, with a Democratic Congress taking over to try and end his tariffs. So by 1896, the Democrats are very happy to support the populist William Jennings Bryan. The very unpopular Republicans don't even bother nominating Whitelaw. Instead, further support over the National Democrats or the Conservative Democrats with John Palmer and Simon Buckner, who at 79 and 73 are the combined oldest ticket in American history. So Bryan would absolutely win, and at 36, Bryan becomes the youngest US president in American history, implementing the silver and gold standard, the bimetallism, and giving relief to farmers and factory workers, uniting the nation. But of course, the economy doesn't fix itself overnight, and people hate waiting. Plus, Bryan slowly gets closer to supporting prohibition and women's rights to vote, so he would lose the 1900 election to William McKinley, who would then get shot and get replaced by Teddy Roosevelt. But Bryan returns in 1908, winning a second non-consecutive term by literally 1 electoral point. Now he's 48, balding, and fat. And so women are given the right to vote in 1909. As well as the 8-hour work week, child labor, senators actually elected by people instead of being appointed, but also prohibition, and weirdly enough, Bryan was actually very against evolution. Teddy will return, and we'll get back on track. Bryan's legacy will be remembered for his economic populism, his social progressivism, yet religious fundamentalism. Very American. Also, Harrison was president. Scenario 2. What if Richard Nixon beat Kennedy in the 1960 election? On paper, this sounds laughably ridiculous, but actually it was surprisingly close. Fun fact, Mississippi and most of Alabama decided to vote for nobody. The electors decided just to literally vote for somebody who didn't even run for president. And famously, people argued Nixon truly lost because of television debates, where Kennedy looked young and handsome and covered in makeup, while Nixon seemed to be nervous, sweaty, and unshaven. It might have convinced a few people to actually go out and vote, but realistically, people who had TV at this point would have been city folk that would have voted for Kennedy anyway. But still, maybe without the debate, and with Nixon not falling into vice president syndrome and actually promoting the fact that he was vice president, he can definitely tip the scale. Maybe instead of Kennedy, Adlai Stevenson decides 3rd time's the charm. But that's too easy. Maybe Nixon, instead of wasting his time campaigning in every state, decides to focus on tight states like Missouri, Illinois, and even Hawaii. Maybe the Southern Democrats try again with Strom Thurmond, committing to segregation and anti-communism. So the election would still be kinda tight, but Nixon wins, being the first current vice president in literally 100 years to win an election to become president rather than inherit it, with Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. as his vice president. The Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba absolutely still happens because this was an Eisenhower decision and would go exactly the same. As for the Cuban Missile Crisis, this can very easily go. But Nixon also didn't meet Henry Kissinger until '67, so you really want to be that aggressive foreignly. So crack open some cold Pepsis with Khrushchev and talk it out, seeking détente. And likewise, the Vietnam War would begin, but likely end by the mid to late 60s, heading into negotiations much quicker. This might be a little too unrealistically nice, but whatever. Splitting the nation in two like in Korea, with the North basically going in the same direction as modern Vietnam, while the South would be a Western-aligned military theocratic dictatorship ruled by the Catholic minority, where drugs are far easier to get a hold of than non-dysentery-filled water, committing constant atrocities against the Buddhist and folk religion majority, as well as against the ethnic minorities. Neither side really wants to unify anymore. Because of the division, Mao has a harder time going his own way and trying to take over Indochina, but still supports the Soviets during the Sino-Soviet split. Ironically, the Kingdom of Cambodia would actually win the Civil War by themselves because the US didn't completely coat the country in bombs. But Nixon still interfering in Latin America and South America, installing dictators. Of course he is, it's still America. But many people would still be unhappy, thinking Nixon's going soft on the Reds. So Nixon engages in the Southern strategy by backpedaling on civil rights to get the support of the South, winning re-election in '64 against Stuart Simonton. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and Transportation would likely be founded around this time. In real life, Nixon did create the Environmental Protection Agency, not really because he liked environmentalism, but by the late 60s it was going to be founded sooner or later. But if Nixon was president earlier, probably not earlier under him. The US still supports in the Six-Day War, and because of no Vietnam traumatizing people from war, America would get involved in the Nigerian Civil War on behalf of Biafra, along with a very unique coalition of people. In real life, the American public did support Biafra, but the government decided to remain neutral. So yes, they're getting oil. So Biafra remains a country today. The 1968 election, of course Vice President Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. is going for it, but with a stagnating economy, at best slow racial integration, and the Republicans being in charge since '53, the Democrats definitely have this. I don't know, maybe also Nixon introduces in his final year the Commonwealth system, a new level of government between state and federal, dividing the US into 13 distinct commonwealths. Nixon's legacy would be far better in this timeline, never needing to spy on his opponents at Watergate and refuse court orders to give up evidence, but he'll be seen as a lesser Eisenhower who could have gone harder against Vietnam. Also, given the Soviets were dominating the space race and Nixon's historic uninterest in space could honestly lead to a Soviet moon landing by the early 70s, which would make people absolutely hate Nixon and wish that Kennedy was president because he really wanted to get to the moon, and we probably could have by '69. As well as the Vietnam War never getting as big, this means absolutely by 1975, America would be throwing all of its resources behind the Democratic People's Republic of Angola against the People's Republic of Angola.
Sometimes it's too late to save a man. Let's move out before we join them in death. Multiplier means the MPLA is ready for attack. They want a fight. We give them a fight. Move out!
So a decade later, this would be this timeline's Vietnam War. War crimes, trauma, jungle, everything. Maybe the V for victory becoming the peace sign becomes a thing by the Biafra War. But who would be the Democrat in '68? It could be JFK, but he was also suffering from Addison's disease by the end of his life, so likely no. It could be Hubert Humphrey, it could be George Wallace. But Joseph P. Kennedy didn't raise no bitch, and one of his kids will be the president. So, scenario 3. Could work with the last one, or independently. So if Bobby Kennedy never got.
Catch!
Even if Nixon wasn't the current president in '68, Bobby was a young, progressive Kennedy, brother of the former gunned-down president. So it's completely possible that Bobby could have become president after Johnson. And like his brother, selecting a Southerner for his running mate, Terry Sanford from North Carolina. It probably wouldn't actually help him because Bobby was so into civil rights, this would probably actually push more people to Wallace or Nixon. Or Cabot. So Kennedy is back in the White House. He's 43 and ready to go. Getting to celebrate his brother's dream being fulfilled with a moon landing. Continuing Johnson's Great Society programs, signing the Equal Rights Amendment, pushing really hard for universal health care. He's basically on easy mode with a majority in the House and Senate and would be able to approve at least 4 Supreme Court justices, giving a liberal supermajority until at least the 80s. And if there's a war in Vietnam, he pulls out and it goes about as bad as it did even in our timeline. That would definitely hurt people's opinions about him the most. People being frustrated that they could have done more. And Bobby just pulled us out. High school history teachers will constantly annoy their class to say, was it a right thing to do, or did Kennedy just chicken out? Conservatives will also backlash at how dare the government want to take care of its people with the health care. So the conservative backlash would be the rise of Reagan far earlier. So sadly, Bobby only gets 1 term. Reagan would definitely want to go back to America's old health system, but getting to a lot of opposition about that, he'll settle for just leaving it very underfunded. Vice President Spiro Agnew would resign only a few months after taking office due to tax evasion, leading to Richard Stryker. Him and Reagan would defeat George McGovern and Sergeant Shriver in 1976. The Camp David Accord is a complete disaster, and Israel continues to occupy the Sinai Peninsula. 1980 sees the election of Henry Scoop Jackson on very progressive social policies while at the same time being very anti-communist. He passes away in 1983 and gets replaced by his vice president, Sergeant Shriver, whose name is Sergeant. And he's a brother-in-law of the Kennedys, and his daughter went on to marry Arnold Schwarzenegger, and their daughter went on to marry Chris Pratt, because everything's connected. Shriver and Joe Biden would lose to Bob Dole and George Bush, who would promote a new Hays Code to promote American culture and get rid of violence in movies and sex on TV. Bush would lose to Bubba Clinton in 1992 when we're back on track. Robert F. Kennedy Sr.'s legacy is one of continuing JFK and LBJ's legacy. He's definitely popular with a certain generation of people, but a lot of people also equally hate him for pulling out of Vietnam. Also, his son RFK Jr. probably gets a little bit of boost from this, but not significant. Scenario 4, a big one. What if Hillary Clinton won the 2016 election? Now, there's a very mature and adult reason why she lost.
Girl.
On top of that, she's kind of famous for being very unpopular. On top of literally being married to a former president, she was a big, smug, liberal establishment type at a time when people were getting sick of the establishment, as well as defeating in the primary a very popular progressive man from Vermont. The Democrats did this in 2004 as well, and it didn't work out for them. People were sick of the endless wars in the Middle East, leading to a populist outsider who campaigned on this frustration and definitely didn't get them stuck in a different Middle Eastern war. But because America, he still lost the popular vote and got elected anyway, thanks Electoral College. But even then, the closest states were very, very close, and Hillary didn't even bother campaigning there because she thought it was so easy win. So she definitely could have tried a little bit more in the Rust Belt. Maybe the scandal of her using her personal email for business stuff, like everyone, doesn't come out as soon. And why not? Evan McMullin enters the race much sooner. Evan McMullin was a conservative guy who just didn't want Trump to win, so he ran in his home state. And why not? Let's give it to him. This is already the most amount of faithless electors in a US election. Might as well. Maybe even the election gets sent to the House. And Hillary Diane Clinton is elected the first female president in American history. Tim Kaine is also there, but this is a huge milestone for American history, alongside targeted cabinet appointments to really bank in on this. Of course, Trump would say this is all rigged and he always wins and this is nonsense, but no one cares. Clinton continues the economic and job growth from the Obama years without giving billionaires tax breaks to break it. Bill returns to the White House as the first gentleman, campaigning for child health and showing up whenever people need 90s nostalgia, but he'll mostly be taking a back seat and showing up whenever people are like, oh yeah, they're still married. And yeah, because Trump's not in office, there's no wall, no racist targeted travel bans, there's no attempts to basically bar people from even entering the US, legal or otherwise, there's no trans-military ban. Hillary actually listens to science and doesn't pull out of any climate agreements, or lifts protections for endangered animals, or put data centers in national parks. Definitely want to rip up the Iran nuclear deal because of small dick energy and not wanting to admit a black guy did something that you could never do. No healthcare cuts, but actually expansion. Not exactly universal, but they would definitely negotiate drug prices. Actually calling out racist actions, though probably never actually visiting North Korea. Merrick Garland would be appointed to the Supreme Court. Likely Anthony Kennedy wouldn't retire as soon given that Dems in the office, but this would still all lead to a liberal majority on the Supreme Court. Conflict with the Islamic State would still finish. A bipartisan infrastructure bill would be proposed, but because Hillary would probably be slashed and halved, but still be a significant improvement, opposed to nothing, as well as a lot of infrastructure towards green energy, actually strengthening ties with European allies instead of alienating them, and trying to wean them off of Russian oil. Hillary would be taking a strong stance against Russia, continuing the complex war in Syria. It's honestly more likely that Russia doesn't invade Ukraine just yet, given Hillary's strong stance against Putin and strengthening allies. But because of this, people don't realize that Russia is a paper tiger yet. Conservative commentators would be thinking Hillary's way too worried about Russia. They're definitely not paid by Russia, but they think that Russia could be used as a good ally against the true threat of communist China, starting a new red scare about China, but because of that also leading to a new yellow scare. On top of BLM and gay rights, Hillary is for reform, but some would say she's going too far or not far enough depending on where you get your news from. And speaking of, 2020 is around the corner. Hillary's all for masks and vaccines, and actually listening to professionals rather than acting like a big boy who doesn't need medicine. So at least 5% less people die from COVID. As the right are spreading conspiracies that China purposely caused it, Trump will be on top of spreading these conspiracies and gets Herman caned. So Ted Cruz tests his luck. But people don't really like him, even if he's copying the rhetoric of Trump. He's not Trump, so Hillary still wins a second term, which would just be Biden's term, really. And by this point, nominating 2 more Supreme Courts. 2024 ends Tim Kaine's time to exist, pulling an upset primary victory over Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, and selecting Josh Shapiro as his running mate. But at this point, people are upset. Some are upset because they were forced inside and actually watch the news and understand the situation in Israel and Palestine and are starting to realize maybe there shouldn't be such support for Israel. And Republicans are upset because they literally haven't won a presidential election in 20 years, and the only thing that seems to really be working with them is the rah-rah populism. But it's hard to find someone who's actually competent that fits that mold. Steps in Josh Hawley, a firebrand from Missouri who's young, energetic, and is definitely what they were looking for. Finding strong support amongst the conservative base, especially for his mudslinging and making fun of people, like comparing Tim Kaine to a Dr. Seuss character and calling Josh Shapiro a big-headed nerd. Hawley selects J.D. Vance as his running mate. It became another competition between establishment and something different, as well as age playing a significant part in the campaign, leading to Josh Hawley winning the 2024 election, becoming the first Gen X president. And for all the people who decided not to vote out of spite because of Israel, well, Josh Hawley is very, very supportive of Israel, so you only made things worse. Recognizing their claims over the Golan Heights and moving the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, alienating their Western allies, which gets Putin fired up to actually invade Ukraine, with the US being very uninterested in helping, and far more interested in destroying everything, and trying to stay out of jail as the government is ran by completely incompetent frat boys who care far more about owning the libs than actually doing anything good. And yeah, Hillary actually did cooperate with the investigation, while Republicans would be trying to hide involvement. Hillary's legacy would be a positive step forward, but not as large as people would like. But no matter whatever she would have done, she would always be remembered as the first woman to get to be president, inspiring a whole generation of girls to get into politics, and also inspiring other first ladies to run for office. And maybe after all this, we accidentally got a little closer to Fallout. I mean, more so than we already are. But let me know what you thought down below, as well as hitting the like button, subscribing if you're new, sharing with your friends, and hyping on mobile. With Hillary Quinton.